If we told you that the NATO of terrorism was being formed, a centralized organization that incorporates many of the most influential insurgency groups in the Middle East behind the unified purpose of shifting the balance of power in the region, you'd probably think we were describing the plot of the next Mission Impossible or James Bond movie. But it's very real. Iran has been meticulously building it behind the scenes for years. And what's more, the war in Gaza may be the first domino to fall in this grand political scheme. It can be hard to see through the fog of war unfolding in Gaza between the Israeli military and the forces of Hamas. A constant stream of horrific violence affecting civilians, coupled with propaganda and misinformation from all sides of the political spectrum, has shrouded some of the strategic maneuverings unfolding beneath the conflict. Beyond the obligatory statements reaffirming their support for the people of Palestine and condemning the IDF strikes against areas with high population concentrations, it may seem to the untrained eye that Iran isn't a player in this particular war, and that's where you'd be dead wrong. Here we enter the murky and sinister world of proxy wars. The links between Iran and Hamas over the years have been no secret. In addition to other documented backers such as Turkey, Iran has supplied Hamas and their smaller sister organization, Islamic Jihad, with weapons, funding, and intelligence over the years. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been quoted in a recent interview saying, "Iran has had a long relationship with Hamas. Hamas wouldn't be Hamas without the support over many, many years from Iran." Earlier leaders of Hamas echoed this statement, with the former leader of Hamas's political wing, Khaled Mashal, referring to Hamas as the spiritual son of Khomeini, a reference to the founder of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. Back in the 1990s, Iran offered the newly created organization support after it split from its nearly century-old Egyptian parent organization, the Muslim Brotherhood. Then, when Hamas came to power in Gaza during the summer of 2007, Iran and Hezbollah provided funding and assistance in weapons development. The largest shared interest that unites Iran and Hamas is, unsurprisingly, their mutual animosity toward Israel. Hamas and Israeli forces have been in near constant conflict since their inception, with Hamas seeing Israel as occupiers on land that rightfully belongs to their people, and Israel in turn seeing Hamas as little more than terrorists. Since the revolution in 1979, the new regime in Iran, which had formerly been allied to Israel, now saw the nation as an arm of Western imperialism, advancing the interests of the United States against the Arab world. And as the old saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. However, Hamas insists on its own autonomy despite this alliance of convenience. Lebanon-based senior Hamas official Ali Barakeh openly said in 2023, "Iran knows that Hamas fights Israel and offers us support, which we do not deny, but we don't take orders from anyone." And this isn't just empty posturing either. Iran and Hamas have a politically complex relationship, and there have even been open disputes between the two in the past. For example, Iran supports the Assad regime in Syria. When Hamas split on the issue in 2013 due to Assad's persecution of Sunni Muslim Syrians, Iran punished them by cutting off almost $20 million in funding, creating a rift between the two groups for several years. Like most insurgency groups, Hamas thrives on unpredictability in its actions on the national stage, which occasionally goes beyond the scope of Iran's influence. Secretary Blinken even said that despite their long-standing ties, the U.S. hasn't found any evidence of direct collusion between Iran and Hamas regarding the October 7th attack that kicked off the violent new phase of the Israel-Palestine conflict. But that doesn't mean Iran has clean hands here. In a way, suggesting Iran has total innocence due to a lack of evidence of direct planning cooperation is similar to insisting that Charles Manson wasn't complicit in any of the Manson family murders just because he wasn't physically there when the crimes were committed. Iran's plan is so much bigger than any simple single-front skirmish. So what exactly is the plan here? What is the nature of Iran's involvement in the conflict? How does Tehran benefit? And what exactly does this have to do with Iran's wider plan to reshape the Middle East in their own image? Before we go any further into discussing Iran's political machinations around the Gaza conflict, and how exactly their unification of the arena strategy may end up bringing down the hammer on its enemies in the region, such as Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the UAE, and of course Israel, we first need to understand the so-called axis of resistance, also known as the Shiite Crescent, which is technically a misnomer given that one of its most prominent members, Hamas, is a Sunni organization. This is a largely informal group of allied forces spread out across a broad swath of the Middle East, including territories in Gaza, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and Lebanon. Let's take a closer look at the different members of the groups of the Axis and where they both support and diverge from Iran's messaging on key issues facing the region. Let's start off with one of the groups that have the closest ties to Iran and the one that has the most stake in the current conflict in Gaza, aside from Hamas itself, Hezbollah in Lebanon. This military and political group is essentially an Iranian puppet, described by many as a mere extension of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's Quds Force, which gives Tehran a considerable amount of influence over its activities. Since October 7th, there have been regular firefights between IDF and Hezbollah forces, increasing fears that all-out war might also spill into Lebanon. But why might this benefit Iran? In short, it's believed that in addition to intelligence, training, and funding, Iran has supplied Hezbollah with missile technology capable of raining down hell on Israel should the conflict escalate. This is obviously not an ideal military situation for Israel, which would then be forced into a war on two fronts that would spread its forces and resources thin. Immediately, you can see why this Iran-Hezbollah alliance is beneficial for both parties. Next comes the previously mentioned Syria, where the ruling Assad family has close ties to Iran and a number of Iran's allies, all of which have helped this controversial dictatorial body keep an iron grip over its country despite frequent rebellion since 2011. However, the degree to which Assad's forces have been focusing on beating down rebellions, even with help from Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah, makes them a slightly less helpful asset in the war against Israel than they would otherwise be. Throw in the tensions that Assad has Hamas on the Sunni issue, and we've got a more complicated member of the axis of resistance. However, maintaining these ties is worthwhile for Iran because of Syria's potential to wage war on the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, as it had done prior to the 1974 ceasefire. There have still been skirmishes in this area due to Hezbollah activity and the explosive Israeli response, but nothing compared to what we're seeing in Gaza right now. However, the more Machiavellian-minded among you might already be noticing the plan forming here. Direct involvement from Syrian forces or even Iran-sympathetic forces simply launched from Syria would turn the Golan Heights into the third front of Iran's multi-front war plan against Israel, in addition to Gaza and Hezbollah-controlled southern Lebanon. One by one, the dominoes are starting to fall. This brings us nicely to the next members of the axis of resistance, a multiplicity of militias in Iraq. Despite frosty relations between Iran and Iraq on a national level, the instability and chaos caused by the US-Iraq war left Iran as one of the few beneficiaries. After all, if this video has taught you anything so far, it's that Iran is no slouch when it comes to creating opportunities out of chaos in the region, which is exactly why underestimating their shrewdness and patience is a dangerous mistake for anyone hoping to deal with them. The United States found this out the hard way, as during the fight against the emerging threat of ISIS in the war-torn nation, Iran was bolstering alliances with a number of the smaller and less infamous militia groups. In a strategy reminiscent of Mao Zedong honing his communist forces during the Second World War in battles against the Japanese, Iran's proxies in Iraq used conflicts with both the United States forces and the forces of ISIS as an opportunity to hone their military prowess and gain a foothold in the Middle East's other largest majority Shiite nation. A disconcerting development for some of Iran's Sunni-majority enemies like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. While the proxies in Iraq are less immediately relevant to the conflict in Gaza than some of the other members of the Axis of Resistance, it gives the Axis members one of the most invaluable resources any military force can ask for: actual combat experience. Their knowledge in fighting asymmetric urban warfare against behemoths like the US military and other insurgency groups like ISIS have given the Axis transferable skills to apply in other conflicts, as well as techniques that groups like Hezbollah and Hamas can employ against Israel and its allies. Then, of course, there are the Houthi forces in Yemen, where one of the most devastating proxy wars is already being fought between them and the Saudi and UAE-backed internationally recognized government of Yemen. With Iranian money, training, and Hezbollah as a structural example, the Houthis have waged a brutal war against the IRG that has created one of the worst humanitarian and economic crises in recent memory. But Iran has still been the beneficiary here, with the Brookings Institution estimating that while the war costs Iran several $1 million every month, it's costing the Saudis around $6 billion in that same time frame. Little by little, these Iranian proxy wars are financially bleeding the nation's enemies, even if doing so is costing countless lives, both military and civilian. While there are smaller splinter factions who exist as part of the Axis of Resistance, these are the main ones, and even in the absence of direct control, it's hard to not notice how often their forces are applied to the end of Iran's interests. This brings us full circle back to the conflict between Hamas and the IDF in Gaza. While the initial October terrorist attack that left over 1,000 Israelis dead may have seemed completely random, It seems to be more than just a coincidence that the attack occurred during the final stages of a historic peace deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia, brokered partially by the Biden administration. It also occurred a little less than a month after Iranian Major General Abbas Nilforoshan publicly discussed the existence of a, quote, integrated command and control network in the resistance front. A strengthened bond between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States would be a geopolitical nightmare for Iran, but the Hamas attack and the ensuing conflict pumped the brakes on that deal and potentially left it in jeopardy. Without ever visibly putting its metaphorical finger on the scale, Iran has secured its interests for just a little longer. But it doesn't stop there. All of these different groups working loosely in the interest of Iran's goals while achieving their own is one thing, but it ultimately just creates chaos in various parts of the Middle East. And in the long term, Iran doesn't want chaos, it wants its own form of order. This is where we move to the true nature of Iran's long-term strategy with Hamas and the rest of the Axis resistance, the unification of the arenas, also called the unity of fronts. The latter term's been grabbing the headlines lately in the aftermath of strategic discussions between Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, and several high-ranking members of Hamas in Beirut. Nasrallah echoed his previous statements about the unity of fronts between Hamas and Hezbollah, and potentially even beyond. As we established earlier, Hezbollah is a puppet of Tehran, and when the puppet speaks, it's wise to turn your gaze to the puppeteer. And if Iran has its way, it's going to modify the regional theater into a unified regional puppet theater. Don't worry, that's the last puppet metaphor. As the name suggests, the unification of the arenas plan is Iran's grand scheme to centralize the command of the axis of resistance, taking them from a loose-knit collection of sympathetic groups into a formidable fighting force with fully unified goals across the Middle East. With greater operational coordination, Iran believes that the capabilities of the Axis as a dominating force in the Middle East, especially against Israel, will increase substantially. But it isn't just about numbers, it's about geography. You may remember us discussing the multiple fronts on which the various Axis forces could take on Israel, and under the unification of the arenas plan, the battlefield of the anti-Israel conflict will be expanded to 4 different fronts: Gaza in the West Bank, managed by Hamas, and then both Hezbollah-controlled South Lebanon and additional Hezbollah forces coordinating in the Golan Heights via Syria, encircling Israel and enemies and forcing it into a resource-depleting multi-front battle. Much like the attrition-based civil war we've seen the Houthi groups wage on Iran's behalf in Yemen. The rhetorical groundwork for this kind of multi-front war encircling Israel has already been laid. Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian made a statement to Al Jazeera saying, "If the measures aimed at immediately stopping the Israeli attacks that are killing children in the Gaza Strip end in a deadlock, it is highly probable that many other fronts will be opened. This option is not ruled out, and this is becoming increasingly more probable. If Israel decides to enter Gaza, the resistance leaders will turn it into a graveyard of the occupation soldiers." The direct invocation of many other fronts doesn't leave much room for interpretation here. And as much as Tehran feigns sympathy for the innocent civilians killed during the Gaza conflict, with all this context, it's not hard to see that Iran wants to escalate this conflict further, rather than encourage peace. Gaza, after all, provides an ideal testing ground for the military theories Iran's leaders have been developing under the unification of the arenas mandate. It seems not so much an issue of if, but of when things get far worse. The natural question in response to all this is, it'd undeniably be a powerful strategic move for Iran, but how would they go about actually pulling this off? And that's a reasonable question. As we've already discussed, with the exception of Syria, we're not talking about allied states here, but more a loose collection of militias and insurgent groups spread over a wide geographical area. Coordinating all this into successful military operations would be no mean feat for any nation. To get to the answer, we need to explore the work of Major General Qasem Soleimani, one of Iran's most decorated and revered military leaders, and his shocking death in 2020. Soleimani acted as the de facto operational leader of the Axis of Resistance, maintaining a hierarchy that allowed him to direct the various groups Iran was funding in line with the country's interest. However, Soleimani's involvement in terrorist attacks against the interest of the United States put him on the Department of Defense's hit list. This resulted in the 2020 drone strike that killed the Iranian Major General during a visit to Iraq under the Trump administration. This threw the Axis of Resistance into disarray, causing it to return to its loose-knit, decentralized state for a period until Tehran had a new idea. In 2021, the year after Soleimani's assassination, The Saif al-Quds War gave us an unprecedented first, a joint operational structure between Iran and the Lebanese Hezbollah, facilitating coordination between multiple separate groups within Palestine against the IDF. It was a revelation that would shape military thinking for the Axis going forward. A joint operations room between Iran and the Lebanon Hezbollah was a viable way to move forward with the unification of the arenas in a post-Soleimani world. The Joint Operations Room, headed by Major General Ismail Qaani of the Iranian Quds Force and the aforementioned Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah, is believed to be comprised of 3 operational levels. The foundational level is comprised of Iranian-backed Palestinian factions such as Hamas and Islamic Jihad. The middle level is Hezbollah, which both co-manages the overall structure while also liaising with Palestine. And yes, of course, the top layer is comprised of Iranian-backed militias in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. All the key parts of the Axis of Resistance were organized through a series of meetings mostly held in Beirut, with frequent communication between Nasrallah and Qaani. Using Gaza as the roadmap, we even have a pretty good idea of how this operation functions on the ground level during conflicts. While each group has a relative level of operational autonomy, they operate under the joint principles of ambiguity and retaliation and risk distribution. Functionally, the Palestinian operatives act as the frontline troops, with support from Hezbollah controlling the southern Lebanese and Syrian fronts. And of course, under the auspices of the Unification of the Arenas plan, where the Axis of Resistance moves as one under Iran's command, it won't just be Hamas and Lebanon's Hezbollah via southern Lebanon and Syria that Israel has to worry about. If the battlefield expands in line with Iran's intentions, 2 of the major Iran-funded Iraqi militant groups, namely Kataib Hezbollah and the Nujaba movement, have signaled their readiness to join the fight against Israel. The same can be said of Abdul Malik al-Houthi, leader of the Yemeni Houthi forces. Israel would have the entire axis upon them, potentially also dragging Saudi Arabia and the UAE more directly into the fight to avoid losing security in the region. This is how Iran would bail Hamas out of what seems like an otherwise completely asymmetric conflict. The united front of Iran's axis of resistance makes Hamas only one small piece of the puzzle, a single front in a war of many. And if you think the Middle East was destabilized before all this, all we can safely say is that we haven't seen anything yet. Now watch India versus China, who would win? Or check out this video instead.